Welcome to this special presentation of the Channel Company, the 2014 Guide to Backup and Recovery in Virtualized Environments. You know, the notion of a disaster can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Ultimately, the truest definition goes something like this. Anything that disrupts the course of normal business operations, while that could be a natural disaster, it's more likely to be a problem with a critical server or data theft or a power outage due to a careless construction crew. Look, regardless, having the right backup and recovery strategy in place before something goes wrong is priority one for your client. The urgency is compounded by a rapid adoption of virtualization, and that is a lot to consider, but the right partner can really make it a walk in the park, and that is what we're going to be discussing on today's channel cast. We're going to help educate you a bit more on the latest in backup and recovery in the ever-changing cloud world. I want to remind you that today's event is live and interactive, so we do invite your question and comments at any time, and you can do that by using that Ask a Question button on your viewing console. We're also going to ask that if you have any pop-up blockers enabled, that you want to take a minute here and disable those, as we're going to be pushing out a brief survey in just a little bit. And one lucky viewer today is going to be receiving a $100 Amazon gift card. So you're going to want to make sure to get noted on that, because you will be notified after today's event. Hello, everyone. My name is Jonas Tichenor. I'm a Director of Content here at the Channel Company, as well as a contributing editor with CRN.com. Note you can follow me at Jonas Tichenor on Twitter. We also have joining us today very special guest, Stephen Snyder. He is the Technical Marketing Manager with StorageCraft. Stephen, really do appreciate you taking some time to talk with us today about this very important topic.
Thank you, Jonas. I'm very happy to be here with you and the Channel Company and all the audience. I'm looking forward to it.
So typically in these types of channel casts, we take a look at a market overview from 30,000 feet, really define the topic for our audience as we see it. But considering where we are in the conversation around cloud and virtualization, I'm not as sure that that brings as much value as hearing more about StorageCraft. So today, I think what we're going to do, if it's okay with you, is we put together some questions that are pretty typical around strategies regardless of the vendor, and we're going to spend some time getting to know StorageCraft a little bit better, if that's okay with you.
That's fine. I'm looking forward to it. I think as far as StorageCraft goes, we're probably not as well known as some of the other competitors out there, the other vendors, but we definitely have a story to tell, and we're going to do that today.
Great. So to get us started, every solution provider out there, certainly ones joining us today, either have or really are looking to offer a virtualization strategy to their business for one reason or another. So take us through a little bit about the StorageCraft story on the big question, why virtualization, and certainly why now?
Okay, Jonas. I think that's a great question to start with. It should obviously be the first question in any guide, is why to actually virtualize. And I know there have been a lot of conversations out there in the IT world talking about virtualization, the merits of it. Oh, I don't want to do it. Oh, it's the most important thing that you should do. And I think probably the best thing to do at this point is to start out with a little bit of a graphic, an infographic here from Forrester that shows basically for those companies that have gone ahead and done virtualization in their environment, some of the reasons why they went and virtualized. You'll notice that the highest priority reason for virtualization for these firms that have already adopted x86 server virtualization, the first reason was to improve disaster recovery and business continuity. We'll talk about that a little more later, but I think that's interesting to note that that's the very first or the highest priority reason. Now there's other reasons as well. There's to improve IT infrastructure manageability and flexibility. The third reason is to create a more efficient shared IT infrastructure. The fourth is to lower the total cost of ownership for servers. Fifth is faster deployment for time to market. Sixth is to improve power and cooling efficiency. Seventh is to provide developers with fast and easy resources for test and development. And the lowest priority, I'm sure there are other reasons that would fit in this as well if we open that up. But as far as Forrester's research goes, the final priority that they provided was to implement an internal cloud. And I'd like to take a brief moment to talk about this right now and maybe address each of these in turn. But first of all, it should be, I've got a graphic here that talks about why virtualizing. And of course, the first reason we talked about was simplifying the backup and to improve disaster recovery. I think StorageCraft has one of the best stories in this area, because when we're looking at backup and recovery solution, we're looking at an overall comprehensive solution. We're looking at backing up your virtual servers, backing up your physical servers. We're looking at a very fast recovery. And in this case, we're talking about virtual servers, of course, because backing up a virtual server is not dependent on your hardware. It should typically be a faster and easier process, making it a simple matter of backing up those business critical systems on your network, in your environment, and then of course getting those back up and running if anything happens. High availability would fit into this, server clustering would fit into this, and all of these would make your environment robust and ensure that your important business systems can keep going. But then again, even though you've got this high availability and server clustering, you've got your load balancing in place, a lot of these things are not a disaster recovery solution. Data that's corrupt on one system in a high availability solution is going to be corrupt on other systems in that solution. So you need to consider recovery as well. And in this case, because it's a virtual system, recovery can often be more, it can be easier than in a hardware environment, because you don't have to deal with the restrictions or the limitations to hardware. If you've got, for example, a server that is a couple years old and perhaps recovering to this with your existing backup and recovery solution requires that you recover to the same hardware, the same environment, that might be a sticking point for a fast recovery. It isn't with StorageCraft, but it might be an issue as far as a recovery goes. So recovering to a virtual environment without these hardware limitations is simpler and often easier. Of course, we want to be able to virtualize servers for a fast failover too, because a lot of SMBs out there don't have the money, the budget, the resources to have an extra server lying around. They haven't implemented high availability, but they want to have all the benefits similar to a high availability environment. So they've implemented kind of a failover process where they can take a backup image that occurred in the last 15 minutes and very quickly virtualize that backup image so that they can fail over to that in the event that their production systems have had problems. So again, the first reason is to simplify the backup and recovery process and to improve disaster recovery in a business continuity scenario. The second reason that showed up in the Forrester's research was to improve IT infrastructure. And I think that's an interesting reason, because basically what we're talking about is the question of how do I want to implement virtualization in my environment as a business? Is this something where I want to have it a hosted service? I might want to go with like a Google Docs or a Office 365 for my email. Maybe I want to take it in-house because it's important for me to have control over my data. How do I integrate that? What resources am I managing in accordance with my business needs and my priorities? And in that case, virtualization can vastly improve the IT infrastructure in your particular business. The third reason that Forrester mentioned was to create a more efficient IT infrastructure. And that's an interesting one, because if you're looking at this, it might be something where you're an MSP or you're a doctor's office or something where the information that you control is shared amongst offices or customers, remote offices. You need to be able to manage this internally so that your efficiency for managing the workloads and processes, the business processes you have in place, is effectively managed through the virtualization tools. This could be something like a virtual storage system. It might be virtual networking if you have multiple departments or customers. It could be any number of things where the ability to abstract your business systems off of a physical device or a physical system gives you that advantage in terms of management and scaling out your business processes. The fourth reason was ease of rolling out new systems. Now, when I've seen this in the past, most of the times I've seen it have been kind of a software as a service environment or a development environment where you have several programmers that are working on projects, and every time they roll out a new project, they want to be able to take a copy of a production environment that's fresh, work on the project within the constraints of that production environment, and then at the end of the process roll that back into kind of a trunk of the original software that is provided. In this case, virtualization gives you the ease of rolling out new systems because making a clone of a virtual system, you've taken a backup of it, you've got it ready to clone out a second time, is an easy way of deploying new systems. It's also a very easy way of scaling businesses. So for example, if you have a head office and you're now branching out and you're opening up another remote office in another part of the state or in a different state, being able to very quickly take what you have in that home office, the Exchange server, the SharePoint server, any of these core business tools, these servers, and replicating these applications out, deploying them quickly to a new environment is a lot easier with a hypervisor than it is with a bare metal deployment process.
Yeah, and I wanted to jump in here just a second, Stephen, because what you're saying here resonates a lot, and you've been talking a lot about Forrester, but this last piece is really where it hits home for a lot of organizations who are sort of taking this advisor approach, trusted advisor approach when it comes to virtualization. It wasn't that long ago, Gartner back in November of 2011, that made this bold prediction in regards to the growing expectation of business that their employees will be able to access work during non-work hours, and the location shouldn't be a barrier. The communication shouldn't be a barrier. And to quote them exactly, they said users will no longer have a primary device for corporate collaboration. They're going to rely on a fleet of self and business-provided devices with the expectation of having a uniform user experience. What we're talking about right now is the foundation for being able to provide that type of user experience. So, there's a business case here that's really easy to make when we're having the discussion around virtualization and moving things along. And you just said it, the branch office, it doesn't really matter if it's replicated in a way that allows, regardless of where you are, to be able to get access to those servers.
Exactly, Jonas. Thanks for jumping in. I was actually going to bring you in because I thought some of the things that you're talking about, for example, being able to open up the remote offices and the Gartner research, it resonates with me too because there's the whole bring your own device trend that's going on right now. And having a worker being able to access information and resources wherever they are is definitely more accessible in a virtual system, either on a private cloud, a public cloud, or hybrid cloud, than it would be if it was a physical device which you have to connect to.
And there are barriers that go. I'm sorry, I was just saying there are barriers
exactly.
with that. There's complexity, there's the cost problems, there's the availability and the idea of losing business continuity, and then there's the whole security and compliance issues. So there are things that organizations have to get over in an effort to move themselves into this wholly virtualized environment. But those things, with the right partnership, can be easily managed, and more importantly, they can be mitigated to really make it a smooth transition. And that's I love what you're talking about, because I think that's an important piece of it.
Thank you. That's exactly right. And you might also add to what you're saying the whole idea of licensing software versus open source software. Where does that fit in? Thin provisioning. That's a technology that allows you to, in a virtual environment, thinly provision a VM client rather than allocating all the resources up front. You can allocate what the client is using today and then scale it out and grow with it. You can't do that with physical systems, or at least you can't do it very easily. I think you've hit on a lot of points, Jonas, that really reflect to how businesses need to look out there and find a partner that will support what they're doing in terms of their business continuity plan. And I think the key to this is that customers, businesses, MSPs, all of these entities need to be able to be informed and to know exactly what these tools provide them so that they can properly implement them in their environment. Speaking of the research, I'm going to swing back over here to the next slide, which talks again about Forrester's research, but it talks about a different direction, ease of testing. And I think so far we've talked about normal business practices, but what about the ability to go in there and test your backups? Or what if you're, I saw in a recent forum thread that I was participating in, there had been a Microsoft patch applied to a server, and this actually caused the server to fail and malfunction. What if you need to be able to test a patch, a security patch, or a code implementation in advance of actually rolling this out and into the production environment? And how great would it be to be able to take that virtual copy of your production system and test against that before you actually produce it? So ease of testing is a big part of why people want to virtualize. Another one might be implementing an internal cloud. I noticed that over the last few years the cloud really was on the upswing. Now I think a lot of people are hesitant to talk about cloud because of all the issues they've seen. Various of the large big players in the cloud industry have had outages, increased costs for their services, gone out of business and decided to leave the cloud service, cloud provider service in the industry. And I think it's really put some brakes on the cloud as a solution for businesses. I think, though, that there is still definite value to implementing a cloud, perhaps not a public cloud where you're actually hosting your virtual systems on another provider, but maybe an internal or a private cloud where you control the environment. You set up your server clusters. You've got all of your networking in place. And whether this is a solution that is in your home office or distributed across multiple locations, an internal cloud can offer tremendous advantages. So we've talked a lot about why people want to virtualize. I think at this point I'd like to hand the time back over to you, Jonas, to talk about our audience, maybe get some information back from them about where they are in the virtualization process. I think we've made a good business case about virtualizing, but let's see what people have to say.
Yeah, I mean it's a pretty blanket question when you ask a potential customer about their virtualization plan. If you take that layer off the top of the onion, it really opens up some more thought-provoking questions, around hypervisors, around costs, around time to migration, and the possible downtime. And I know we're going to talk a bit more about that in just a moment. But like you said, got a quick poll question that we want to push out to our audience. The question goes something like this: do you plan to implement server virtualization projects for your clients? Several responses here. Projects are already completed or in the works. Projects are planned for the next 6 months. Projects are planned for the next 12 months. Projects are planned for 2015 or later, or no projects planned That is why I am here. I like that one. If you're a betting man, and I know you're not, Stephen, where would you feel like a lot of folks are at, considering the people that you deal with? We're going to give our audience just a couple minutes here to answer this. But where do you think a lot of people are going to be at in this? And there's no wrong answer, so you're not going to lose the trip to Hawaii.
Oh, come on. I want that trip. It's pretty cold up here in Utah right now. We've got a lot of snow, and it's been a little warmer over the last few days, but a Hawaii trip would definitely be worth something, worth a bet at this point. You know what? Looking at these, I would have to say I'm going to say it's going to be pretty evenly spread. But I'm hoping that more of the projects are already completed or are planned for the next 6 months. The only reason is just the way that the industry seems to be moving. Most businesses are really looking at making that leap, and if they haven't already done it and are looking at the solution to partner with for making business continuity in their virtual environment a success, they're ready to do it today. And perhaps, like the last one says, that's why I'm here. They want to see what's going on. But I'm going to say evenly spread.
All right, I'm giving folks just another couple of seconds here to answer. I want to remind you that if you have questions for Stephen, you'll use that Ask a Question feature on your viewing console, and we're going to get to as many of those as we can. Relevancy, if they're relevant to the topic right here as we're having this conversation, by all means push those, and we'll try to address them as we can. So let's just take a look at these results and see where we're at. It looks like 40% have projects that are completed, are in the works. The next biggest group is projects planned for the next 12 months, and not surprising, 17%, a little over, say there are no projects planned, which is why they are here. So it certainly does open up this idea that there are folks certainly wanting to figure out what the next steps are in terms of their virtualization projects. And, something that we talked about before the poll question was just taking a look at these questions around hypervisors specifically. How do you know which hypervisor you should be taking a look at, and what are some of the things you got to consider when you're looking at those?
Well, Jonas, I think that's a very good question, because really the first step in going to a virtual environment is, of course, planning. And I think it was Benjamin Franklin that said an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And it's a very applicable question to say, which hypervisor do I work with? Obviously, the amount of experience you have with a particular hypervisor comes to play. Maybe the costs of licensing that particular hypervisor and the various features and functions that are part of that hypervisor platform should also play a big part in this. But it's tough to decide. And I know in our slide right here we're talking about VMware. I think it's important to note that VMware basically was the innovator. They were the first x86 hypervisor out there. Now, there were mainframe hypervisors before that time, but as far as a hypervisor for a server or workstation, VMware was the first one on the block. They were the ones that got out there and produced the product, and have since then come up with some amazing software tools. They're software-defined data center, software-defined networking and storage, all of these things that are out there today with vSphere, vCenter, and Horizon, all give us tremendous tools for managing a virtual environment. So definitely they're a big player on the block. But even though VMware is such a large innovator and leader in the industry, I think that Microsoft has definitely come a long way in the last few years. Their Server 2012 Hyper-V solution is an incredible solution for businesses. They have raw specifications that have changed over the last few years to where the Server 2012 R2 Hyper-V gives you a terabyte of memory as opposed to the previous 64 gig in Server 2008 R2. In addition, they've increased the number of logical processors you can have up to 320 versus the 64 that were in the previous version. And of course, the amount of nodes you can have in a virtual cluster has also been increased from 16 up to 64. So Microsoft, I know they've kind of played a little bit of catch-up here, but today I think that the Hyper-V solution is a definite contender in the hypervisor decision-making process. Another thing about this is Microsoft has a lot of integration with other tools. They have their System Center and their Virtual Machine Manager, which give you a lot of scalability as far as an enterprise solution. I read not too long ago that in the past, larger businesses and enterprises would consider VMware as the solution because kind of the truism was Hyper-V was great for small businesses and VMware was great for enterprise. But you know what? Today I would put them neck and neck because I think VMware has a number of amazing features that could be very useful for small businesses, and Hyper-V from Microsoft has really come a long way as far as an enterprise solution. Now, the nice thing is these aren't your only choices. You've got a number of other vendors that you can choose from as well. For example, StorageCraft supports not only VMware and Hyper-V, but we also support Citrix XenServer. And as well, we have support for Oracle's VirtualBox product, and in addition, Red Hat's KVM hypervisor. So there are a lot of options out there, and definitely, I know it's great to have a software giant backing you when you're looking into your hypervisor of choice, but there are good reasons for going with other hypervisor vendors as well. So when you ask Jonas, how do you know which hypervisor to go with, I would say do your homework and look at your specific business needs. If you've got an employee that is experienced in Hyper-V and you like the licensing model there and you realize that with your specific resources, the cost for running a Hyper-V core in your environment as a host server for your virtual machines is the best way to go, then that would make sense. On the other hand, if you've done your homework and your research and you see that, hey, you know what, I really like the functionality of vSphere, and ESXi is just an amazing tool. We're looking at VDI and VDP for our distributed services and our data protection, then maybe that's where you want to go with it. So there's a lot of options.
Do you get a lot of questions around the licensing bit? I mean, I know some of the popular ones, they talk about a pay-as-you-go approach, and they'll help you with certain aspects of your virtualization, and others you can kind of mix and choose. But how important is it to have the understanding on how the licensing works, and also the approach when it comes to how you pay for that?
You know, I think for long-term success that licensing is very important because it seems with a lot of these technologies, there will be a free version out front to kind of get you involved, get you working on it. Hopefully people look at this free version as a chance to get their feet wet and see exactly what this tool can do. But a lot of times that's a marketing tool to kind of draw you into a specific solution, and by the time you've got into that solution and you partnered with them, you realize that down the road you could have done better with a different solution, and you don't really want to have to forklift at that point over to the other solution. So really, if you can plan in advance, not only for what resources you need, but also for the licenses that you'll need as your business grows, see down far enough that you can realize that one licensing model is going to be better than another. And you know, I'm glad that you brought up licensing, because in another slide or two, actually 3 slides down, I wanted to talk about licensing and some of the various implementations of that. But I do get a lot of questions about licensing.
Well, I didn't mean to put the cart before the horse.
No, it's all right. This is a discussion, and that's why we're here. I don't want to stick to the slides, so if people have questions and if there's relevant information, something resonates, let's definitely address it. This is important time from our audience, and I want to make sure that we make the most of it.
Yeah.
As far as virtualizing, though, I think you kind of touched on, if I can just jump to the next slide, the costs of virtualizing. And one of the first things I think for our audience that that basically is here to find out about virtualization, one of the most intimidating aspects of virtualization is the added complexity. They look at it and say, you know what, not only am I going to have my physical systems and my core business applications, but now I've got to have another layer in between, sandwiched in between the physical device and the applications that I've got to manage. And I've got to be able to monitor this. I've got to have people that know how to troubleshoot it. I've got to implement patches and upgrades. There's just this added layer of complexity that I really just don't see a need to get involved with. And obviously that can be a cost for businesses. Hopefully in our discussion we can talk a little bit about why this cost is offset by the return on the investment of virtualizing. And in this case, I think the added complexity gives you the ability to get away from a hardware dependence. It gives you mobility as far as moving virtual machines from one host to another. So if you're doing any kind of an upgrade process, that's easier. It gives you the ability to break out business processes as workloads and then assign a workload to a specific system. So in the future, if you've got a problem with your Exchange server or your web server, these aren't necessarily housed on the same server as maybe Small Business Server 2003 did in the past. Now these have been broken out as separate VMs on a host, and you can isolate where the issue is as far as troubleshooting and managing them faster, and you can obviously deploy new systems or additional resources much faster. So this added complexity, I think, even though it could be intimidating, it's worth getting past it because of the rewards. Another cost of virtualizing is the virtual machine creep. I think this is for that part of our audience that has already virtualized systems or is in the process of virtualizing systems over the next year. They will probably see how easy it is to deploy additional systems. Virtual machine creep basically refers to the fact that you start out with maybe 10 servers in your environment, and before you know it, you've propped up a couple new test servers, a deployment server, you've broken off a few additional workload processes, and now you're looking at 20, 25, maybe even 30 servers in your virtual environment. Not to mention the fact that in our case, as StorageCraft is a backup and recovery solution, you may have several systems that you've archived that you want to be able to stand up and test, or you want to be able to get back to archived information as well. And that tends to create kind of a library of virtual machines that you can stand up, and that managing and monitoring all of these virtual machines because of the virtual machine creep that occurs becomes a problem. So that's an additional cost to virtualizing. You mentioned licensing. I think this is probably one of the most important aspects of going virtual, because if you've got virtual creep going on, or you've got any kind of multiple systems in place where you've broken out workloads and in the past they were all on one system, you've obviously got to get these licensed, not just for the applications, but also for the operating system. To be honest, Jonas, and maybe I can get your input on this, it seems to me that a lot of the trend these days towards virtual machines that use an open source operating system like Linux is because of a licensing issue. What do you think about that?
No, I totally agree with you, and I think that becomes part of the questions that a lot of folks have around it, because they're dealing with that on a day-to-day basis, trying to figure out how to optimize the process. And I love you call it VM creep. That's an awfully nice term. We hear it termed as VM trash a lot of times. I do have a question coming in from Melinda, who's asking about the current licensing. Is there an upgrade path on your licensing if the company changes their current model? I wanted to jump in there since we're talking about licensing, and this question came in on that.
That's a great question. Actually, we do have a number of options for upgrade paths. If Melinda is a managed service provider and she's in our partner program, which we'll talk about later in this, there is some definite upgrade paths that she should consider that make it very easy as you're going from a physical environment to a virtual environment to swap out licenses, activate or deactivate new licenses as they're needed in your virtual environment. In addition, we of course allow upgrades through our maintenance. So if you have current maintenance and you're running an older version of our software, you can go through the normal procedures to upgrade your software there as well. And then last but not least, I know some of the questions I've fielded recently in several online technical forums have been about moving a physical license over to a virtual license. And two good things to point out there. One, your physical licenses that you have with us work just as readily, your physical Shadow Protect server licenses work just as easily in a virtual server as they do in a physical server. And another thing to point out is that our virtual server licenses, if you have VM trash, you said, or VM creep, our virtual licenses are much less expensive than our physical licenses. So we definitely want to help people move to a virtual environment. All of these things make it easy to get your licensing as you move from a physical environment to a virtual environment, and also to make it an easy upgrade path. If she has specific questions about her environment and her licensing, I would be glad to talk about them. She can message us, email us at marketing@storagecraft.com, and I'll address those specifically. But I did want to assure her that we do have some great questions with regards, or some great processes in place with regards to licensing for moving from a physical to a virtual environment. So Jonas, if it's okay, I'm going to go ahead and go on to the next slide. This talks about migration, and basically it's asking, where do we start? And in this process, Melinda touched on moving from a physical environment to a virtual environment and the license path. That would be one part of where we start. I think really in a more top-level view, where you start would typically be dependent on the scope of your project. You need to be able to look at the scope, look at what you have and define where you want to go, and then plan the steps between these two points. So but that begs the question, how do you define the scope of your project? And in defining the scope of your project, I think really you have to look at the business needs first. What kind of business are you in? What kind of data and information are you servicing to not only your employees but to your customers? Where do the workflows and workloads fit in? So you've got to define your workloads. And then once you've got these business needs and workloads defined, then go in there and start measuring your resources. Take a look at your current utilization, look at your budget, and figure out basically what you'd expect that utilization to grow into in the future, how you'd break that out and assign resources to each of the workloads. And in that case, you're building out a definition of the scope of your project. You're putting some meat on the bone there and saying, okay, these are the resources that we're going to need because of what we have in our current physical environment in our new virtual environment. And at that point, you're getting a lot of this information in place for what the scope of your project is, and ultimately that's going to define exactly what services you put in place, what licensing you're going to require, and in a lot of cases, because of the features and functions available in hypervisors, what hypervisor you're going to use. A lot of this is going to be defined through building out the scope. Now, another thing is, what backup solution should you choose? And I know a lot of these environments that we saw in the audience poll seem to be a hybrid environment. They have both a physical and a virtual solution in place. And really, the nice thing is you don't want to have to deal with that one backup solution for your physical systems and another backup solution for your virtual machines, your clients, you'd really like to have kind of an overarching solution that takes you from the beginning step all the way to the finish line, and can cover your backup and recovery for bare metal devices as easily as it can cover your backup and recovery for your virtual machines. In this case, one solution should also have some kind of a management and a monitoring part of it, so that it could be a simple process of seeing all these machines, especially with our VM creep or VM trash that's going out there. You want to be able to see and monitor the backup processes on these machines. And of course, you want to be able to very quickly virtualize your backup images in the event that there's a disaster of some kind. So as far as a backup solution goes, definitely you want to talk about what type of backup solution you should use. And I think one of the interesting topics that comes up, and this used to be a hot topic in the backup and recovery world, and it's kind of got some new fuel in this particular fire, is do I want to go with an agent-based or an agent-less backup? And the interesting thing is, back in the day, Microsoft said that the recommended backup process would include an agent in the operating system that could handle information at a very low level of the operating system, manage your CBT change block tracking, manage the quiescing of important SQL Server or Exchange Server processes, so your app-aware processes would get a solid, clean backup, and do this through an agent. Of course, an agent typically would involve some kind of a production server reboot at some point when the agent's installed. So a lot of people felt that, hey, you know what, I don't want to deal with the reboot. I'd much rather have something that could inject processes, maybe through a remote procedure call to the operating system, get me a backup, and then uninject that. So I can send these backup requests out to systems regardless of whether or not an agent was installed. A lot of people talk about this in terms of an agent-less backup, when really when it comes to virtual machines where a lot of this new fuel has been added to the fire, it may be considered an agentless backup in that it's not a persistent agent. But a lot of software vendors that do backup and recovery still inject an agent in order to properly work with VSS in the Microsoft Windows operating system, and leverage VSS to get that volume shadow copy, and then uninstall that agent afterwards. Now, if that's done in a good, solid, reliable way, obviously it's going to work probably as well as an agent-based backup. But there's always a concern when you're installing software and uninstalling software that there might be some kind of instability that occurs, and also the interaction in the operating system in terms of the agent's ability to properly get a clean backup. So as far as StorageCraft goes, we actually go with the tried and true practice of an agent-based backup. And in the virtual machine world, we allow you to install that agent on your virtual machine, and that agent sees the virtual machine from the perspective of the client. And so it's actually down there in a very low level of the operating system, seeing things in terms of the virtual drive that's associated with that operating system in the client, and of course all of the applications running on the client. One of the benefits to this, we feel, is that we provide you with not only very reliable backups, but also very fast backups, because when it comes to something like CBT, we don't have to traverse the file and directory system to see what has happened since your last previous backup. We're actually tracking it all the time, and so we can just hit that and reduce the window in your backup and its impact on your critical business systems. In addition, because we're doing this from the client perspective, we see everything in terms of an actual disk image, and we take an entire image of your system, not just your operating system, but your installed applications, running services, as well as your critical data. So we're taking everything from the perspective of the client. I think at this point, Jonas, the next slide is talking about disaster recovery tools. Did you want to?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I wanted to jump in quickly and just sort of wrap up the previous section, because one thing I think it's important the audience knows if they're looking at this is this migration piece that you had talked about and scoping the project. I mean, you talked a little bit about it, but that is a big deal because you have to know, especially around applications, what business applications are being used, what you want to use. There's a ton of auditing that gets done where business applications that don't get used, you'd be surprised how much space that they take up because they're never even being used. And so having the right audit, having the right partner who can help you scope that project out is going to be a much bigger deal than the limited time we have to address it here. But it's a huge part of that project, and it's something that should be done with some care and someone who you trust, because there's a lot that you want to make sure you're optimizing from a business perspective.
Okay, thanks, Jonas. And you know what? As far as that partner goes, I'll just go ahead and do a little bit of a shameless plug at this point, because some of the slides that I wanted to touch on, our ShadowProtect IT Edition software. A lot of customers may not be aware of this, but even if you're using your own backup and recovery tool, this is a tool that you can use to, it comes on a USB stick. It allows you to very quickly do a backup of a production system without installing any software. And it's an unlimited use during the subscription of this license. So the license is on a subscription base, maybe 2 weeks, a month, a year of use. If you've got an upcoming physical to virtual migration, this would be a great asset to have, because what it allows you to do is, let's say I license this for 2 weeks. During that 2 weeks' time, I can take full backups of production systems just by plugging in that USB stick and running the backup wizard. And then I've got those ready to be restored to the virtual environment of my choice. And our hardware independent restore is included in StorageCraft ShadowProtect IT Edition, which allows you to very quickly restore that backup that you took over to a virtual environment. It'll strip out all of the drivers in the hardware layer so that you don't have any ghost drivers running around, and it'll properly inject the generic drivers for your hypervisor. So this is definitely a great tool because it's an unlimited use tool during the subscription period, and it makes migrating servers from a physical environment to a virtual environment very fast and easy. In addition, I mentioned that it's you can buy it on 2 weeks, 1 month, 3 months, a year. So you really only pay for what you need in this case. We also have our ShadowProtect Virtual software, which is the ShadowProtect software that runs, including the agent that will back up your virtual environment. This is a very fast and flexible environment, and it also includes our StorageCraft Virtual Boot technology, which allows you to simply right-click on a backup image and spin up a virtual machine of it. This is priced per VM, and I think if you compare our prices with some of the vendors out there, you'll see that we have extremely competitive pricing for virtual systems. Of course, if you're using our ShadowProtect Virtual, I just want to reiterate that we have support for a number of hypervisors, Hyper-V, VMware's ESXi, Citrix XenServer, Oracle's VirtualBox, and Red Hat KVM. So really we want to be able to cover you regardless of what you're looking at. Just to kind of give you an idea of how this all fits in, I know we've talked about our ShadowProtect IT Edition as a very easy physical to virtual solution. And that could be used if you have your own backup solution. Let's say you're using Microsoft Windows, their backup for their server, and you want to be able to move this over to a virtual system. Well, or if you want to be able to move it from VMware because you're already using it on a VMware system and you want to move it over to a Hyper-V hypervisor, well, certainly you could use IT Edition, But when I talked earlier about having kind of one solution for your backups for both your physical and your virtual, if you're already using StorageCraft solution, we've got you covered both for the physical and the virtual, and it's all part of our comprehensive recoverability solution. This would give you the 5 steps you need, the 5 simple steps you need to make sure that you're protecting your business data. That fits in with our backup, which is our StorageCraft ShadowProtect software, as well as replicating and managing your backups, which comes under the umbrella of our StorageCraft Image Manager. And then, of course, recovery, which fits under our ShadowProtect software as well and our recovery environment, but also allows you to look at it in terms of our cloud offering, which gives you the ability to recover in our cloud, to spin up a backup image in our cloud as a virtual machine with a public IP address on a VPN or through RDP access to that system, so that if you have an on-site disaster, you're covered. And then, of course, all of this is monitored by our Shadow Control CMD, and we encourage you with that monitoring to periodically test each of these systems. So basically, the idea is that this is an overall recoverability solution that takes care of you whether you're physical or virtual. And as I mentioned earlier, the licensing for this, if you're an MSP, definitely take a look at our partner program because, well, first and foremost, it's free to join. And so if you're an MSP, something free to join is always worth checking into. In addition, we offer some NFR licenses, so you've got free software. We do have marketing funds allocated to our partners so that if you want to grow your business and you qualify for these NBF funds, then you can definitely have some additional cash in your wallet to build your business. And of course, there's the MSP program and our newsletters and all of the parts of that make this a very profitable solution for our partners. If you're interested in learning more about our partner program, please check out our website at storagecraft.com/profit-ability to learn more. And of course, you can always contact us directly at contact us at storagecraft.com, or me and the marketing team at marketing@storagecraft.com, and I would be glad to work with your questions directly. We also have an IT recovery zone, which has a remarkable content regardless of where you are in the virtualization process. That's definitely worth looking at. It has case studies and ebooks that are from your peers that have gone through the same process before, and it's a tremendous resource for you regardless of what you're doing. Jonas, I think at this point I'm about done, so I'm going to hand the time back over to you. I think we probably have some questions to answer, and I'd like to take the time for that.
Yep. Yeah, we do have some questions. Also want to remind our audience that we are going to push out that survey that we talked about at the top of this channel cast. So if you have pop-up blockers engaged, then you probably won't be able to see this. If you happen to miss it, just hit me back with that Q&A, and we'll re-push it out and make sure that you are able to participate if for some reason you missed it. So we got a question coming in from Jeff, who's asking is there any solution that can take the VM image from one cloud vendor to another cloud vendor?
That's a great question. It really depends on the cloud vendor, Jeff. I know as far as StorageCraft goes, we are hardware agnostic, and I think that still applies to the cloud. So I'm going to coin a new term and call us cloud agnostic as well. As long as you've got a secure FTP connection, we can take our backup images and place them in whatever cloud vendor you have. As far as cloud goes, we do recommend that your local copy be your primary copy, and so for us, moving from one cloud vendor to another is more a matter of where you're storing your off-site images. And that's why with our cloud service, we've gone to tremendous lengths to offer seed drives for $10, bare metal recovery drives shipped overnight, and to integrate this process into our system to a point where you can actually recover files and folders specifically from systems, from backup images in our cloud, or like I mentioned, virtualize a backup image in our cloud, which I think makes us unique compared to other cloud vendors where you might have difficulty hosting a VM of your backups in that cloud vendor. But as far as pointing to one cloud vendor over another, definitely we can do that. I think really as far as the features of the two cloud vendors, it depends on those specific vendors.
Okay, next question is from Mitch, who's saying, the whole point of my virtualization project is to eliminate backup issues. Do I really need a separate backup vendor for virtual machines?
You know, Mitch, I think a lot of backup vendors would like to tell you that yes, you want to have an exclusive virtual machine backup vendor, but the whole point is you want to have a reliable and fast recovery. And with StorageCraft, we don't really worry so much whether this is a physical machine or a virtual machine that you're restoring to. In fact, we've got so many options in place for recovering to both physical and virtual that the idea is when you've experienced a disaster, whether it's a power outage or a natural disaster like an earthquake or a hurricane like Hurricane Sandy, it doesn't really matter what you're going to be restoring to when it comes to StorageCraft, because we'll restore to pretty much anything you've got available. And locking yourself down to one vendor for physical and one vendor for virtual really kind of limits your options after disaster, because it might be that you've got to restore to the same version of ESXi that you had the backups taken on, because the different build that is available to you after the disaster might not properly run or restore your backup images. That doesn't apply to us. I would say really you can have one solution that covers both your physical and virtual needs. You don't need to have different backups for each.
So Andy is curious about if you guys provide any deals for nonprofit organizations.
Yes, we do. And you know what, Andy? Go ahead and email us at marketing@storagecraft.com, and I'll go ahead and work with my supervisor, Laura, to make sure that we handle that directly. I just want to let you know that we do support nonprofit organizations, and we also support a lot of the disaster recovery relief organizations that are out there taking care of needs in cities after the major events have happened in the past.
Okay, next question is from Tim, wondering if you offer private, public, and hybrid cloud services as an offering.
Yes, Tim, we do. And let me speak to that a little bit. I know we don't have a lot of time left, so Tim, if I don't completely answer your question, feel free to touch base with me at marketing@storagecraft.com. But the nice thing about our image manager solution, which is the admin tool that manages your backup chains, checks the integrity of your backup images automatically and frequently, and alerts you of any issues, is that it also allows you to basically create your own private or hybrid cloud as far as replicating your backup images to other locations. And because this is an admin tool that is at no cost, you can actually install the image manager solution locally and as well in your offsite, like your co-location or your public cloud location, if you have that level of rights to that public cloud host, so that you can manage your image manager processes there as well. And Image Manager has a patented Head Start Restore that allows you to basically queue up your backup images as a virtual volume or a physical volume, so that in your offsite location, you can basically have a warm failover of your production system just waiting to be spun up. So definitely we have a lot of options in terms of public and private cloud. Image Manager also handles your WAN acceleration and your bandwidth throttling, and all of this can be done very easily. So a lot of options to whatever you want to do as far as public, private, or hybrid cloud goes.
All right. Well, with that, we're going to have to make that the final word. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for today. If you've missed any portion of today's channel cast, it will be available in its entirety on demand. And speaking of on-demand, we have a great library of Channelcast content, past, present, and future, and you can access it by liking us on Facebook/Channelcast, or go to crn.com/channel-cast/index.htm. I want to thank my guest today, Stephen Snyder of Storage Craft, for joining me. And for all of us here at the Channel Company, my name is Jonas Tichenor. Have a great day, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.